Afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Sue Brucey. I'm the Marketing Director here at 2W Technologies. Today's webinar is going to be Epicor specific, uplifting classic customizations to Kinetic UI. Our presenter today is Sam Plumer, who is our Epicor Practice Director at 2W Technologies and pretty much our go-to guy for anything Epicor related. For those of you who are not familiar with 2W Technologies, we are a full-service technology and managed service provider, as well as have been an Epicor partner for over 34 years now. We currently also do Epicor for distribution as well as manufacturing. We are a large Microsoft partner. We currently hold 4 designations and 1 specialization for them. I will now turn it over to Sam to get us going.
Hi, everybody. My intention here today is to walk us through the uplift of a specific customization, including one that contains some client-side C# code in this case. If you're asking yourself, why is this important? You probably already know this, but I'm here to remind you that countdown clock is less than 1 year away. In May of 2026, Kinetic 2026 will be released in public cloud environments and for on-prem customers in May of 2026, Kinetic 2026.1 will be general availability. And that is significant because Kinetic 2026.1 will not support the smart client. That is the locally installed Windows executable that implements the client-side screens of the Kinetic UI. And what that means in turn, if there is no smart client, there is no support for the classic UI. So those customers who have classic UI screen customizations, the clock is ticking on the remaining lifetime ahead of those. And if you're a public cloud customer, you better have a plan to live without the smart client and the classic UI by May of 2026. If you're an on-prem or 2W Epicor and Azure customer, in any case, if you're if you're Epicor on-prem licensed, regardless of where you're deployed, you won't be able to transition to Kinetic 2026 and future releases until you've come up with a plan to deal with those classic UI screen customizations. So anyway, that's the call to action. I want to talk a little bit about what are the steps that any organization faced with these challenges needs to be thinking about. And again, if you're using the smart client and the classic UI, and if you have screen customizations, you fall into this camp. And these are the steps that you need to take as an organization to help plan and prepare and be ready when May of 2026 rolls around and the changes that are afoot become reality. So, and again, we're not going to talk about all of these steps today, but if you're interested in understanding more about this process, please give us some feedback at the end of the webinar. If you'd like more content like this to help you plan and prepare for the Kinetic browser, please reach out to us, either back on this or reach out directly to Stu or to me, or you can just send an email to sales@2wtech.com and we'll be glad to have direct conversations with you. So in any case, the steps we need to do are pretty common sense, but the first step is to identify, and I'm going to show you some tools that are available to you very quickly to help you identify any classic UI customizations that are present in your Epicor environment. And again, we're not going to spend much time on identifying. or prioritizing, but in short, prioritizing is really working with the business in your organization to establish of those customizations, which ones of them are the most important to the business so that we can prioritize those for uplift. The two bolded points here, analyze and uplift, are what we're going to focus on during today's presentation. And then, of course, once those uplifts have been completed, we do need to test those with the greater user community within our organization and with the business users, and document those customizations both from a technical point of view and update our end user procedures and other business maintained documentation that supports the business processes. And then, of course, the last step is to deploy those customizations in your production environment. So again, not going to spend a lot of time on all these steps, but just wanted to give you kind of a little bit of context for where we are in the process in the context of today's conversation. By the way, before we move on, I do want to acknowledge a couple of other people who've helped me prepare this content. The content for today's webinar actually started about in a conversation I was having with Nathan Schaefer at one of our customers, Material Transfer. We were having some conversations around this exact topic, and as part of that, Nathan agreed to let me use one of the customizations that Material Transfer uses and counts on to support their business processes as a use case in today's presentation. So thanks to Nathan and the folks at Material Transfer for agreeing to help us make a very real use case for everybody here. Also, I want to acknowledge the work of Anthony Avila, one of the technical consultants on our team, and also Zach Williams. I mean, Zach and Anthony and our tools consulting team here at 2W, they're probably spent upwards of 100 hours a week on our team on efforts just like this across our customer base. So a lot of the tips and tricks and things we're learning have been developed by that team and shared with me. So I don't want to take any credit for anything that we might be coming up with here. I'm just the guy who's kind of putting it all together and presenting it to you. So let's get started down into the content. So just a few notes about identify and prioritize. Again, we're going to talk about how we identify classic customizations, but I think it's very important that this is not viewed as solely a technical exercise in your business. We need to involve the business. In this case, we're going to be looking at some customizations to the part entry screen. Again, in most organizations, entry is heavily used within engineering. It's also typically heavily used in the purchasing and procurement functions, and in many cases also in sales or inventory control or production management. So again, there's lots of folks at Material Transfer count on the functionality that I'm going to show you in this customization to do their jobs every day. And part of that prioritization is working with the business in your organization to understand the impact and priority, and to also validate the need to upgrade. And again, I don't want to neglect this point, because just because a customization is present in your system doesn't necessarily mean that either anyone is using it or using all of its features and functionality, or that it isn't possible to achieve the same goal by another means. So again, this is not in the scope of today's presentation, but just want to remind you about these essential activities. So I'm going to switch over and talk about a couple of tools that are available to help you. So the first of those is a tool that's available here in Kinetic. So I'm just going to slide my browser window over, and I've created a favorite for this, but there is a dashboard available in your system. And again, easiest to just use menu search to find it, but it's called the Configuration Upgrade Dashboard. Not exactly certain of which release of Kinetic this was introduced with. I believe it's probably Kinetic 2022, maybe 0.1 or 0.2. In this case, on today's demo, I'm actually demoing on Kinetic 2025.1 update 4, just in case anybody has questions specific to that. But again, if you're running a Kinetic release 2022 or later, you should have the configuration upgrade dashboard available to you. So again, I have a shortcut to it, but what I want to point out here is there's a series of panel cards, or with BAQs behind them. And then in this case, there's one called Classic Customizations and Personalizations. I can simply expand that card. And in this case, I see there's really only 4 classic customizations present. Again, this is a demo system, tightly controlled environment. It would not surprise me for folks that have been running an Epicor ERP for many years or decades in some cases, if it wouldn't. I've seen plenty of cases where there's hundreds of customizations out there. But again, this will help you identify what's present. And again, the one we're going to focus on is this one right here. And again, it's a customization called part entry _V2. And in this case, it actually, the developer chose to create a concise description. It's part entry with some auto numbering functionality. There's a little bit more information available to us here, including, what version it was last compiled for. And again, this is actually the ICE framework version. So ICE framework 5.0 corresponds to 2025.1 Kinetic. These older ICE frameworks these were built on older releases, but they're still present. And in this case, the status field indicates they're still possible to use. Again, we're not going to look at any of these others. We're going to be focused exclusively on part entry V2. Another tool that's available to Epicor customers, and I'll come back to it in a few minutes, is the Epicor ERP Analyzer tool. And this is available from Epicor by making a request to your CAM. As long as you're currently on maintenance, this tool is available to you upon request. And again, it's tied into this site called the Epicor Upgrade Services Portal. I think I'm already logged in, so I'm not going to log in again. I guess I am going to have to log in again. So give me just a second here. It's always the danger of a live demo, right? So I have access to a lot of site IDs. I'm going to search actually for my site ID. This is 2W's site ID. All right, and you see I've made several passes. I want to look at this most recent pass at my live database. I'm going to go ahead and drill into that report. And there's quite a bit of information here, all of it useful. But in this case, I want to come over here to the Custom tab and then drive on down to my UI customizations. And for some reason, I'm not seeing them. We'll come back to this later. Not to get too sidetracked here. But in any case, identify and prioritize. You have a couple of tools available to you to help with that. But again, don't discount the value brought by your business and by your user base. They understand most intimately what's essential to your business. All right. So if I'd been able to use the ERP analyzer. And again, I'm just having a little bit of a demo cramp there. We're going to pass it by. I did grab a screenshot from this. And in this case, when I ran the ERP analyzer tool yesterday, right here is that same customization we looked at. Again, it's a customization on the form part entry, and the name of it is Kinetic V2. Now what I've done here is highlighted several areas that are providing valuable information to me as a developer. First of all, this flag right here that says Kinetic Rework. Again, if this form was going to be able to be upgraded, and we'll talk about how their forms can be automatically upgraded in just a few minutes without any rework necessary. In other words, no human being developer was going to have to touch this thing to make it usable. This would instead say Kinetic compatible for this particular customization. But in this case, it's correctly identified that this customization is going to take some developer attention in order to restore it to 100% functionality. Another important piece of information, and again, if we were on the Upgrade Services website and I hovered over this little icon here, what this is actually telling me is that form, the customization, has some event handlers. And again, event handlers are C# code in most cases, although there are some other types of code out there, but generally it's C# language code that handles events. And again, in plain English terms, a button on a form, which we'll look at in just a moment, is an object, a UI object, and an event is what happens when I click on it. So there's an on-click event on a button. In fact, there's several on the form that we'll look at and try to understand. But the bottom line is what this is telling us is the event handler code cannot be automatically upgraded. A developer is going to have to deal with that manually, and we'll talk about that in a minute. There's also some more information I want to point everybody to while we're looking at this. Down here, the number of new controls. In this case, there are 11 new controls. And again, in plain English, a control is anything that is put on a form, a screen, that didn't exist there out of the box from Epicor. So a field is a control, a label is a control, a button is a control, and there's many other types of controls. But the bottom line is this is telling me there's 11 custom objects on the screen. And this LOC tells me there's actually 99 lines of code associated with this screen. And we'll go look at that in just a moment. Now, a couple of other useful pieces of information in terms of assessing initially how much work I have to do here are the classic complexity. In other words, the Upgrade Analyzer tool has looked at the code that implements this customization and assigned a relative level of complexity. And again, there's simple, intermediate, and complex. And again, that tool, the Ascend or Cirrus ERP Analyzer, has said that this is a complex customization in classic view. And it also is telling me that it has assigned a complexity level of complex for the associated Kinetic customization. But not to worry, we've got 40 minutes left on today's webinar, and I think you're going to see that this is something that can be pretty easily dealt with. Probably not in 40 minutes, but definitely, in a manageable amount of time. All right, so that's a little bit about the second tool. And by the way, if this tool is available to you, the ERP Analyzer, I recommend using it because it provides a little bit more information than the configuration upgrade dashboard, which I'm showing here. Again, configuration upgrade dashboard is useful, but ERP Analyzer is more useful. All right, so enough about analysis. We've identified the fact that we have a customization here called Part Entry V2. We've talked to the business, in this case, engineering and purchasing and production management, and they all agree, hey, this customization is important to us. It makes our job easier. By the way, in this case, the real answer to that is they could live without it, but the process of assigning new part numbers would be more complex. And you'll see in just a moment where I'm actually going to review the functionality of that customization, which is what we're going to do right now. So again, this is my slide deck, and I'm going to tell you what I'm about to show you, and then I'm actually going to show you in the UI how we can tear this thing apart. So again, there's some user-defined fields that have been added to the part table. They are this finish ID and finish color. And there's also some layout changes. In this case, this is the part manufacturing comments. It's been relabeled as a memo, and it's been placed at this location versus the standard part entry screen. And then the object we're going to focus our efforts on is this next part button here. Again, I'll show you in just a minute what that button does. So give me just a second to get over here into our environment. And let me turn on developer mode if it's not already on. So developer mode's on. We're going to launch part entry. And we're going to go ahead and choose that custom layer or customization, in this case, called part entry underscore V2. Little Jeopardy music plays while we do that. And here we go. Now, again, one of the things that can be useful is just to compare different versions of a form side by side. So I'm going to go ahead back to the menu. I'm going to launch again, but I'm just going to launch the base form this time. Hope this works. It worked yesterday. So there we go. So there's my base form on the left and my custom form on the right. We'll make them the same size so they are a little bit easier to focus on. And let me get rid of this Kinetic UI reminder message. Okay, so again, base form on the left, custom form on the right. And as I highlighted in my PowerPoint slide, there's our next part button. There's our finish search button. There's our UD fields for finish ID and finish color. And oops, I'm not ready for you yet. I'm not ready for you yet either. So, and there is that part manufacturing comments, which I think lives over here on the reporting tab, manufacturing comments. So again, we had to navigate a couple of tabs. In this case, it was determined that that was an important field for the folks at Material Transfer. So they moved it over here and displaced some of the default fields that normally appear in this location. So again, we're really in the analyze phase. Again, understanding what has been changed in our custom layer and what it does. So again, I think everyone understands that out of the box, Epicor Kinetic and Epicor 10 and Epicor 9 and Vista and Vantage 8, and probably even before that, didn't have any auto part numbering functionality. And of course, lots of folks don't really like the idea of having to come up with a unique part number on their own. Sometimes it's a guessing game. And so in this case, Material Transfer decided they wanted Epicor to automatically be able to assign a new part number for them. So I'm just going to show you what some of this functionality does. So I'm going to create a new part, and I'm going to click the next part button. And in this case, I added a little debug message box function that's just telling me, again, we can suppress this if we want to, but I added this in just for clarity on today's call. So what there actually is, there is a UD field on the company table that basically is called next part number, and it's an integer field that we just keep incrementing as we add new parts. And in this case, the next part number is 220. So when I click OK, you notice that's put into the part number field, and then I just need to complete a description. I'll just call this part 220, and I'm done. Now, for the sake of brevity on today's call, I'm going to skip over the finish search and these two UD fields, but there is some additional work to do, and we'll see when we go and look at the kinetic layer that can be automatically created for this customization. I'm going to do that in just a few minutes, but for brevity on today's call, I'm not going to deal with these fields or with the finish search button and its corresponding event handlers. So again, that was a demo of part of the functionality available to us in this customization. All right, so now it's time to flip back over to our PowerPoint presentation. Give me just a second. That'll kind of get me reoriented. Sorry about that. I have too many things going on here. There we go. Come on. Get you out of the way. All right. So we are well into the analyze phase of those steps that we talked about as part of our Kinetic UI transition. And again, we've identified what I'll call some cosmetic changes to the form. We moved some fields around on the form. I would classify those, and Epicor classifies them that way as well, as cosmetic changes. We've not necessarily changed the function of the form. The fields still do and behave exactly the same way. We've just rearranged them. Now, in this case, client-side code exists, and we're going to flip back over to take a look at how we identify that client-side code. But again, as a reminder, when we were looking at the output of the ERP analyzer on the upgrade services portal a few slides ago, that tool identified the fact that there was client-side code on this customization. So we already know it before we even go into customization entry. But again, I'm going to jump back over and show you where we locate that custom code. By the way, I'm not going to maximize my screen this time. Hopefully you can still see it okay. I'm just going to resize a little bit to make it easier for me to toggle back and forth. So this is my custom form. And since I launched this in developer mode, I can go ahead to the tools menu and launch the customization tools. I'll take just a moment to load. All right. So hopefully all of you are at least familiar with the customization tools dialog. And given that, I want to just remind you where all of the custom code lives. So all of the custom code associated with this custom form lives here in the customization tools dialog on the script editor tab. And again, there's more than 99 lines of code here, but some of this code is not necessary. So again, what I want to point out, again, if you're familiar with C# code, again, what we're looking at here, These are comments characters, and I don't believe the Epicor ERP analyzer counts comments as lines of code. But anything that doesn't begin with that is functional code. Now, if you're fluent or at least conversant in C#, and again, I'm going to make this screen a little bit bigger for a moment, you might be able to read this code and by inspection determine what it does. I'm not. And so what I might want to do is use some other tools. And again, right here begins the event handler code for that object called BTN next part. And the event this handles is a click. As you saw when I clicked on the next part, Epicor did something. And that's implemented by this event handler code. So if I'm fluent in C#, I can probably read this and say, okay, I see what we're doing here. Again, my C# is middling at best, we'll say. So what I want to do is copy that code. And in this case, no presentation on an IT topic or any other topic would be complete in the year 2025 if we didn't throw some AI tools at you. So I'm going to use a couple of AI tools to help me understand exactly what that code does. And like any good demo, I've pre-cooked a little bit. So first, I want to show you what Copilot was able to tell me. So again, what I did was I prompted Copilot. I said, please explain what this code does. And then I pasted that code in here. Again, not even particularly neat. But Copilot did a really good job of summarizing it. This C# method, and then there's the method name, is an event handler triggered when a button, likely labeled next part, is clicked in an Epicor ERP customization. Here's a breakdown of what it does. And again, does a great job of walking me through the code of what it's doing, initializing and connecting to the company adapter. Because remember, one of the things I told you was this code uses a field, a custom field on the company record to track what the next part number is. We also retrieve the current company ID and from the call context data set. And we go look up the current company ID. We take a look at that field, that custom field called next part _C, and we increment it. And again, you can see the C# code rows that implement that change. And then we flip back over to the screen, to the form that's loaded, and using the Epicor data view, we set the value of the part num in that data view to the next part that we retrieved from the company record, and update the UI. And so there is a quick and dirty way for me to at least understand what that code block is doing without really knowing a whole lot about C#. By the way, if you're not, and again, the point here is that there are many AI tools that might be useful to you. Another AI tool that's available to you, and we use extensively internally, is this one, and it's called Resolve IQ. Again, Resolve IQ is also based on Microsoft Cognitive Services, just like Copilot 365 is. But Resolve IQ is company specific. And again, I gave the same prompt, explain what this code does. I pasted my code in, and Resolve IQ did a pretty good job of walking me through what it's doing in plain English. So again, you may not be able to completely convert your code, and we'll talk about what needs to be done with this code in just a minute. But the point you have at your disposal between the customization tools in the classic UI and access to various AI tools, I showed just 2 of them, there's lots more, the ability to take a block of code, the event handler code, and figure out what it's doing without actually knowing C#. All right, so back to the presentation. So now we're aware that we have a customization. We know what that customization does over and above what the base screen does. Now we're going to use one of the built-in tools within Kinetic to create a Kinetic layer that mimics most of the behaviors. And I said most, not all, but most of the behaviors of that classic UI customization, but creates it as a Kinetic layer. So here I'm giving you a screenshot. This conversion program doesn't take long to run, and I'm actually going to walk you through running this conversion program very quickly, but we're not actually going to run it during this demo because I don't want to wait for it to run. So again, back over here, and this can be done in either the classic UI or the Kinetic UI. Maybe I'll do it in Kinetic UI just because that seems more kosher. So again, back here to the home screen in Kinetic. In this case, I'm going to maximize this. And I've created a favorite for the conversion workbench. Again, you can use menu search. You should be able to locate conversion workbench. The only thing I want to do is change this combo box selector from auto run conversions to user run conversions. And again, if I look down through, these are, I think, by default sorted in run sequence order. The conversion we're looking for is this one right here called Create Kinetic Customizations. I simply select it and then click the Run Pending Conversions. And it'll take, again, depending how many classic UI customizations are present in your system. Again, in this system, I think there were 4 or 5 present, not a whole lot. You know, if you have hundreds, this may take a little while. In this case, I think last time I ran it yesterday, took about 3 minutes to run it. It shouldn't take long. But again, we're not going to wait on that to happen because, you know, we've got a time schedule to stick to. So what I want to do is show you what that creates. And again, to recap what that does, and the description does a pretty good job, but it basically says it creates a Kinetic layer for each UI customization present in the database. So I'm going to go back over and launch Application Studio, and we'll go look and see if those layers have been created. And again, for those of you who may be new to Kinetic UI and Application Studio, a layer is, for all intents and purposes, the equivalent of a customization. There's some subtle differences, but for the sake of this discussion, think of a layer the way you would think of a customization. Now, I'm going to use grid filters because there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to say I actually want where, well, let's first filter where our layer name does not contain the word base. And that cuts it back, but there's still quite a bit of stuff out here. So, by the way, this was one of the other classic UI customizations that was present. There was a customization called PO entry V1. We're not going to look at that right now. I'm going to go ahead and filter this because we care about the part entry. So what you'll notice here, this part AR, part maintenance MX, and part maintenance PE, these are layers that were created as part of some country-specific functionality for Argentina, Mexico, and whatever country is abbreviated as PE. Must be Peru, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, what we're seeing here, this is the Kinetic UI layer that was created by running that conversion process a few minutes ago. So let's go take a look at it and see what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that to open it up in Application Studio. Again, it's confirming I'm opening part entry with a custom Kinetic layer called part entry v2. If you're not familiar with Application Studio, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to recommend a couple of Epicor Learning Center courses that you can take to get more comfortable and confident. But for right now, we're going to focus on this element of the application, the main form. And again, I simply select the form and click the little pencil to edit that form. Now, again, we're looking at a custom layer, and I kind of needed to know what I was looking for in this custom layer based on that functionality, my analysis of that original classic UI customization. And I did look at this yesterday, so I already know. So this is part of the custom layer. And again, this is just a label that says V2. And in fact, I didn't point it out, but this existed on the classic UI customization, and that automated tool created it here. Again, our two custom buttons, next part and finish search, along with those two UD fields and the control that was moved onto the main form for part manufacturing comments have all been moved to pro. So now I'm going to show you in just a minute, but I'm going to tell you first what the data conversion was not able to do was create the event handling code for this button or for this button. And again, we're not really paying attention to the finish search in these UD fields today, so I'm going to ignore those. But what we are going to do is go ahead and preview this form. Again, we're going to run the form and see how it behaves. So first thing I'm going to do is bring up an existing part. And again, this is one that I created yesterday. There's just a whole bunch of parts that are sequentially numbered with really boring descriptions on them and a bunch of default values. So that form works. Now, if I had chosen a part that had manufacturing comments, and actually let me flip back over for 1 second to my presentation because I've forgotten which part had those on it. Give me 1 second here. Oh, well, I'm out of luck. You'll have to take my word for it that these guys, all of the fields work. So these are still linked to the UD fields on the part. And if I was looking at a part that contained that UD data, I guess I could demo it this way. I'll just put some garbage in there. Save my part. And I'll clear my screen. And I'll come back to that part. So in this case, those are still linked appropriately. I didn't put anything in the manufacturing comments, but I think you can trust me on that. So the point is, the automated conversion actually did a pretty good job of creating a usable form here. Now, here's what it didn't do. And again, this is where the details of doing the analysis and working with the business to understand. Maybe this form is good enough because we have all of our UD fields and our rearranged field in a pretty good place. So maybe this form is usable as is, but if the business also says, hey, we really need that auto numbering functionality, here's where we have some exposure. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the form and create a new part. And again, what should happen based on the classic UI customization is I should get a new part number here. And notice nothing's happening. I'm not getting a new part number. I'm not getting a message that tells me what I need to do. And this is as expected. Again, the ERP analyzer told me there's event handling code on the classic UI customization that cannot be automatically uplifted. It told me you're going to have to go recreate that. And of course, in Kinetic UI, that means we need to create a function. So now, unfortunately, function maintenance, even in Kinetic 2025, still requires us to use a classic UI. So I'm going to jump back over to where I have my smart client running. We're going to take a look at what we need to do there. Again, I see we're starting to run short on time, so I'm going to have to move just a little bit faster. So we're done with classic UI for right now. Now I don't need to restart the form. I'm just going to close it anyway. And this is where a little bit of magic happens, because I am not going to walk you through all the details of actually building a new function from scratch. But I am going to provide you some references for doing that at the end of the presentation. So as you may or may not know, Epicor functions, which I think have been around since about 10 to 500, maybe 700 for sure. Epicor functions are server-side code, and they have actually quite a few advantages. Number one, it's server-side code. Number two, it's highly reusable. Functions can be called from anywhere, including from other functions. But in this case, what we're going to do and what we've done is we've built a function that does all the same things. In fact, it uses similar but not the same code. We're going to go look at this. So in this case, Anthony created a library for me called pod demos. And again, he created this function called get next part. Now, one of the things to know, and because I do want to go take a quick look at that code with you, you can only use and execute functions when they are published, which means they're available for use in the system. Now, in this case, if I want to go look at that code, I actually need to unpublish or demote the library from production for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and do that, answer the warning, and then I can go on over and I can take a look and I can launch the function designer. And again, very simple. If you've used a BPM designer, it's very similar to that same kind of paradigm, including all my widgets I can drop into the workspace and connect them. In this case, there's a custom code widget, and I want to take a look at that custom code. And again, very simple set of code. And again, that's probably a testament as much as anything to Anthony's skill as a developer. But again, a very simple code block. And again, I'm going to cheat because I'm semi-ignorant. And I'm just going to go over to an AI tool of choice and just say, I might have hit enter too soon there. Give me 1 second. And again, running a little bit slow, but the bottom line is this tool has, and it's still working. And I know I'm watching the clock a little bit anxiously, and I'm a little concerned we're not going to get done by the top of the hour. But the bottom line is, this is a pretty straightforward block of code that does all the same things. It connects to the company service. It retrieves the value of the next part. It stores that value, and then it increments and updates the part record, and then returns that next part. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this. I'm not going to save my changes. I'm going to close the designer, and I'm going to re-promote this so that it works. And hope I didn't break it in the process. So now we're going to go back over to Application Studio, and we're going to look at another layer. So again, I'm running this form in preview, so I can just move my sharing bar a little bit, and then I can go ahead and close that. And I'm going to go ahead and change my layer. And again, I've created a new layer here. In this case, it's called Part Entry V2 -demo. I'm going to go look at that layer. And what I've changed on this layer is, go take a look at this guy. Down here on that next part button. So when I select that next part button, I can come over here and take a look at the properties for this. And under behavior, you can see I've created an on-click event. And again, if I click the ellipses, I can take a look at the app map that implements that. So again, the first thing we do is detect a button click in the UI. The next thing we do is call that function. And again, we're going to the functions library and the get next part. After that completes successfully, we're actually using a kinetic message handler to display a toast message, i.e. a notification in the UI. And then we're going ahead and updating the row that's loaded in the UI to set the part number equal to the next part number field. And again, I see we're running pretty short on time. So what I want to do is just show you how of adding that function and then calling that function along with a row update from the event handler here in Application Studio is replicating the functionality that we had in the classic UI. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my form right now. And again, just like before, I create a new part record. I click next part. You'll notice up here, I get a message notifying me. And I may take this out after I'm done debugging, but I can close that message and notice the next part has been assigned here. I can complete the process and save my record. And everything's good. So again, what we've done here is we needed some developer effort to create a function that replicates the client-side C# code in that customization. We've added an event handler to the button in Application Studio layer, and then we tested that event handler to make sure it works as expected. So at this point, I'm going to return over to my presentation. We talked a little bit about functions and what their benefits are, and showed you a little bit about the function maintenance screen in the ERP. And then I showed you how to use Application Studio to add that function to the button click event. Now, I promised earlier that I was going to share some supporting documentation. And again, if this presentation felt like it was a little bit of a stretch for you, I would suggest that you go take a look at these resources on the Epicor Learning Center. Again, there's a course called Complete Introduction to Functions, self-paced course. I think if you complete that course, you will be much more comfortable with what functions are and how to create and maintain them. We also did some work in Application Studio. And if you go to the Epicor Learning Center, use the course search feature and search for courses in the category called Application Studio, you'll see more than a dozen courses there. But I think those provide a very good foundation for you to get the basics of Application Studio and layers, and then help you build up to, adding additional objects to the UI and adding event handlers to those objects, including, what I've demonstrated here, tying the execution of a function to an event handler in the UI. And then, of course, if you're a little rusty on embedded customization tools, there is a complete embedded customization self-paced course if you want to understand a little bit more about the classic tools. Again, I understand if you don't want to learn about that, but again, you need to know a little bit about the customization tools to be able to do those things. Like, for example, we used a classic UI customization tool to retrieve the event handler code and analyze it. So at this point, that's the conclusion of the presentation content. I'm going to pass it back over to Sue, and we'll hang around for a few minutes for Q&A if anybody has any. So thank you very much.
Sam, great job. There's a question that came in earlier about, I missed the first few minutes. Is the Analyzer tool available for public government cloud users? I tried through our CAM a year ago and was told the Epicor Cloud team had to do it for us. That
is probably still true. If it was true, but again, you might want to ask your CAM again. But in any case, if you are either public cloud or Gov Cloud or any of the other Epicor SaaS products, and you want to use the ERP analyzer, contact your CAM. And if they say you need to contact Epicor Cloud Services, I believe the proper course of action there is simply to open a support case, on Epicor portal, say, hey, I would like to request that the ERP analyzer be run against my production or some other instance, please do that. So again, I'm not 100% confident in that. Ask your CAM again, but if they say it's available but has to be run by cloud, I think the appropriate method is to open an Epicor case.
Great. Okay, next question. Why is there so much urgency around this topic right now, especially if I'm on-prem?
Well, couple of reasons. Number one, if you're an on-prem customer, that next upgrade that you take, in other words, in May of 2026, Kinetic 2026.1 will be GA, the latest available release, and you can't upgrade to it until you've figured out how to deal with your classic UI customizations. Again, maybe you can live without them, more power to you. But if any of those are required by the business, you're going to have to figure that out before you can do that upgrade. And again, I mentioned earlier in the call, our tools team, Zach and his team, Anthony and Damien and Jenny and Shans are really busy all the time. And, let's say it's definitely in April of next year. If you call us, we're going to do our best to help you. But I have a feeling we're going to be overrun with work related to this at that time. So that's why we're encouraging our customers to plan ahead.
Question. I don't write code. Is there any way for me to do any of this myself? When I see code, it scares me.
So, yes. Again, I'm probably I'm not a developer. I can write a little bit of code, but I'll tell you what, AI tools, and again, pick which one you like, whether it's Chat GPT or Grok or, Resolve IQ or Microsoft Copilot, they're all pretty good. And what I demoed today was just using an AI tool to understand what code does. But keep in mind, those same tools can help you make changes. Like, let's say I want to make a simple change. Like rather than incrementing the next part number by 1, I want to increment it by 10 every time. I could ask the AI tool, how would I change this code to increment the value by a different number? Let's say 10. You could just ask the AI tool, and it would probably do a pretty decent job of suggesting the needed code changes. So again, I'm not saying you could do this all by yourself, but it's probably worth a try if you're brave. And again, you're not going to be doing this work in a live environment. You need to do it in a test or a sandbox environment. And, I'd encourage you to give it a try. And of course, there's tons of resources, both peer resources, here in this group and, on Epi users that can help you. And if you run out of options, we're always available to help too. So, we're here to help. If you can do a lot of the work yourself and, instead of asking 2W for 24 hours of help to help you analyze, document, uplift, test, deploy, you just want some help doing the code uplift, you could turn, 16 hours of consulting maybe into 4 hours of consulting. So again, lots of options available to you. Don't be afraid to try the code tools. And if you get stuck, we're here to help.
Great. I know we're running late, so that'll be all the questions we're going to take for today. If you have any remaining questions or need anything, you can reach out to sales@2wtech.com. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sam. Great presentation, and we will see everybody next time.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us.